substitute economy. Now, Indian currency like the rupee was inconvertible and high tariff imports licensing were required. But in the new policy, there was lots of reforms, lots of changes were taken place. Like I told you that the country, the center reform was the liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Now there is said that why it is needed, why there is need for economic reforms, or why in this new economic reform was needed. So it is here we have our listed points that why these reforms, why these changes are required for this developing for the development. So it is required for these reasons. Okay. First is that increase in the fiscal deficit. Listen, always this fiscal deficit means when there is more, when there is expenditure. Okay. When there is expenditure, which one? It may be the revenue and the capital. When these gonna be more than the revenue, then a fiscal deficit arises. So when there is need of this economic reform is to increase in the fiscal deficit. As we know, there was lots of difference between the expenditures and the revenue, because when a company be in a benefit, when it will be on this surplus, when their expenditure gonna be less than the revenue. So to increase the fiscal deficit mean there is the or a reform was that when there was the fiscal deficit, when there was a huge difference between the revenue generated and in the expenditure of the government, then the borrowings were done from the financial institution. Even World Bank supported to the nation, and loan was sanctioned to the nations for meeting their expenditure, because there were less revenue, means less revenue was generated from the tax, from the duties, and indirect sources are there. And to meet the expenditure, to meet where the government gonna spend, our government expenditure gonna to maintaining the roads, to constructing the buildings, to constructing the hospitals, to constructing the educational institutions. All these gonna be developed, or as all on these institutions government gonna spend for developing the nations. But there are there are many of these that there are less means of revenue, as some peoples are not paying the duties, not paying the tax. So that's why government is not able to earn as such much the revenue, and there is need arises. For that they borrow the funds to meet these expenditure, because that all these things gonna be study, or these gonna be kept in mind while deciding the government budget. All these factors gonna be decided in the when government budget is made. All these expenditure, I told you, expenditure gonna be revenue expenditure or maybe capital expenditure. Revenue may be revenue receipt or maybe the capital receipt. Okay. So these gonna be treated as expenditure, and these are the revenue. So when fiscal deficit simply means when there is more expenditure than the receipts, that amount is equal to the fiscal deficit. Okay. Next need is the mounting adverse balance of payment. Now we know the balance of payment when there is more, means there is the total exports minus imports. When there gonna be more imports and more less exports, it means the country is having the trade deficit. The country is having the trade deficit. And for mounting this balance, for balancing this balance, mean to making the equalization between the export and import, and also to make more exports and to less exports, this economic reform is required. Okay, because this balance of payment we have studied, so it is the difference between the total exports and total imports. So when the imports gonna exceeds from the exports, that is called the balance of payment. And when it is gonna be in a minus, in a negative way, it means there is a trade deficit. And when it is to be in the plus form, it means there is trade surplus. So for this policy is also required, because there is only there was two situations when the country is having the favorable balance of payment, rest of countries having the unfavorable situations. Next is Gulf crisis. Now, what are these Gulf crises? Sorry, sorry. Okay, Gulf crisis means um, even there is a Persian Gulf War was there. So it is a war that was begun in 1990 when Iraq invaded Kuwait. So that was ended in the 1991. So when a coalition of countries led by the United States, there was need of the economic reform was there, means there was need of this due to this some crises were there due to the Gulf War. So that's why these economic reforms, these changes are required for the development of the country. Okay. Next is fall in the foreign exchange reserve. Although there is the foreign exchange reserves, there is so much fall in this because there was more importing more imports than the exports. So there was fall in the foreign exchange. As if we talk about the data of 1986 and 1987, it was 815 crore 8151 crore. So it was declined in the year 1989-90, that is 6252 crore. So here a situation arises that the countries, when there is foreign exchange reserves are declining, because most of the these exchange reserves are using for growing purposes. So for this economic reform is needed. Next is rises in the prices. So as we know, if we talk about the inflation rate, because the money supply in the market, it is increasing day by day. Because when the uh, why how this inflation situation rises, when the inflation कब rise होती है, when there gonna be a more supply of the money, because it will increase the consumption power of the people, and there is more flow of money that will leads to the inflation, because at that time it will affect the supply and goods gonna be short. That's why the price is gonna be high. And there is a need for economic reform, there is need for economic change. As if you talk about the inflation rate, okay, there was changing, it is changing, in it is increasing day by day. Now in also it is the inflation stage, because the prices of the goods are high, because people are having more money, the money supply in the market is more. That is why, because in opposite of inflation there is a deflation. Deflation means when there is shortage of money, when there is money supply in the market is less. So all these we have studied that it is in the hand of the central bank, that how to control this inflation and deflation um, situation, deflation conditions of the country. So when the inflation is there, then the government, then the central bank even, that tries to increase the cash reserve ratios. When there is deflation, it tries to decrease the cash reserve ratio. Means central bank, the RBI gonna play important role, a very vital role in the inflation and deflation control. So last we have need of the economic reform is the poor performance of the public sector, because there was a poor performance is done by the public sector, and there was privatization was there. That is why we have some changes were made, privatization was did, because these public sector, these were not efficiently doing their job efficiently, they are not working, they are not managed properly. That's why economic reform was needed, because all these business gonna be done by the private sectors. So because these privatization and they will do these works in an efficient way, that will be automatically helpful to the country. So this is the need of the economic reform. Why we need it? Because there is increase in the financial deficit. There was a adverse effect on the balance of payment. There was Gulf crisis was there because the war was there, and this fall in the exchange reserves were there, prices were rising, and there was poor performance of the business sector undertaking. So these were the reasons why these economic reforms was needed. Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now we have that main features of economic reforms. I told you that there are privatization, liberalization, and globalization. These are the main features of this economic reform. These were the reforms by our by the country. Okay. So here first we will talk about liberalization. So liberalization means to unshackle the economy from bureaucratic cobweb to make it more competitive. Means to make free the economy to direct and physical control that is imposed by the government. So its main features, if we talk, it is to do away with the necessity of having a license for most of the industries. Next, it is needed that freedom in determining the scale of business activities, removing restrictions for the movement of the goods and services from one place to another, freedom to fix the price of the goods and services, reduction in the rates of taxes, freedom from unnecessary control over the economy, and simplifying import export procedure. And last one is the simplifying the procedure of attracting foreign capital and technology. So this is why this liberalization is required. We told you liberalization means making free the company, that they may have the choice to fix the prices of the goods and services. They are free to move goods from one place to another. They are free that there should be a reduction in the tax rates. They are free to control over they have freedom to control over the economy because they have given the taxes. So they simplifying the import and export procedures. So all these gonna be the chief features of the liberalization. Now we say that what are the measures taken for the liberalization. Here we have the listed measures. So we have various listed measures for taken up this liberalization. First is abolition of industrial license and registration. So to making the liberal all the industrial sector, first reform, that is the abolishing the industrial licensing and registration. It is the main policy, it is the main step taken in the economy. So it means as we say, there are only licenses required only for, means license list is shortlisted as short goods are there, means there was so less goods, that are 6 types of goods for whom license is required. Rest there is no license procedures are required, and on these license it will include the liquor, cigarette, defense equipment, industrial explosive and dangerous chemical and drugs. These on only on these goods license is required. Rest all are the free to trade. On the rest of the industries there was no restriction on the there was no need of licenses required for establishing the business unit. Next measure was taken for liberalization is the abolition of MRTP Act. Now, what are MRTP Act? It is the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Act. That is that this act means all companies those are having assets worth rupees 100 crore, that was declared to be the MRTP firms. So this act was also abolished. Okay. Next measure was taken, that is freedom for expansion and production, means there is a freedom is given to the industries, powers are given to them, that they can expand their business, they can expand their business. There is no such conditions are employed that they are not, or there is no limit is provided to them. They can expand their business and they can produce their goods as per they require. There is no such restriction or there is no such conditions are applied to the industries. Next is increase in the investment limit of the small scale industries. If we talk about the investment of the small scale industries, it was raised to 5 crores. Earlier, there was less limit. So in this liberalization, there was the limit of the small scale industries. It was increased to 5 crores. Next, we have the freedom to import capital goods. So while this liberalization reform, there was a freedom is provided to the industries that they can import the capital goods from the foreign countries. They are free to buy it from the. Okay. Next measure was taken, that is freedom to import technology. As they can import the capital goods from the foreign countries, they are also liberal to import the technologies, because the new technology, the innovative technology, that will be helpful to develop the nation. As there are new machines were there, new equipments were there, computer techniques were there, electronics were there, that are imported from the foreign current country to make the own country, to develop own country, means by having the new technology, by having the new technique, new scientific means from the abroad. Next measure taken for liberalization is that free determination of interest rate, to making the liberal, to making or to giving the freedom to set free the interest rates, means interest rates of the banking system that are free. There is no longer determined by the RBI only. So this is the liberalization given, that means there is a liberalization that they can set up the interest rates as they like. Okay. Next is the tax reforms. There was so much changes in the tax slabs. So there was a reform was that there was so much change in the tax reform. As if we talk about the income tax, the individual income tax, that is the direct tax form. So there was so much rates are declined, means the income slab was increased. Okay. So these were the measures that were taken for the liberalization. Is it clear? Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Okay. Now Alice here, liberalization we have studied. Now we have privatization. Now what is privatization? See. So in brief, privatization means an economic procedure through which some public sector undertaking is brought either partially or completely under private ownership. Means public enterprises are public sector what? Public sector are those which are run by the government. But privatization means when its ownership is either partially, either some part is handed over, it is brought to the private ownership and are completely under the private ownership. In a broader way, we can simply say establishing private sector instead of public sector is also privatization. Means establishing the private sector enterprises rather than the or instead of public sector, that is also called privatization. Earlier reserved for it, means there was reservation, means only the public enterprises, there was reservation was there. But while this reform was there, so there was this the reserve for these such kind of industries is now not taken place. So here we can simply say that these privatization, it means allowing such private sector to set up and more industries, as there was reserved sectors was there that is to be run by the public sector only. So there was, now they can own and they can run these sectors. Okay. Now we have, okay, so we have different features of this privatization. It is that there is a reduction in the role of public sector, because the most of the enterprises, most of this sector is it is run by the public sector, and there is increase in the role of the private sector as privatization is there. So also there is reducing in the fiscal burden of the government. There is the fiscal burden of the government, there is also it is also decreasing. Next is the size of the government machinery, it is also reducing. Next is speeding up of economic development, because all this sector is to be run by the private ownership. That's why there is speeding up of economic development. There is improvement in the management of the enterprises, although there is also increase in the competition by opening industries, and also there is increase in the government treasury. So these are the some main features of the. Now we have that what are the measures are adopted for privatization. First we have, here we have list. So first we have the contradiction of the public sector. So why there is need? Because in the earlier there was contradiction, there was some reserve industries were there, that is to be run by public sector, that is to be run by the government only. So that is why there was some contradiction, that those industries which are run by public sector, which are run by government, that is not to be run by the private sector. But this contradiction is it was covered when there is the restrictions which are imposed on the private sector to not hold or not set up the private public sector, that was abolished. So there was the contradiction between the public sector and the private sector, that comes the need for, and that becomes the need for taking this privatization. Next is disinvestment in existing public sector industries. Now, disinvestment. What do you mean by disinvestment? Basically, dis-savings. Okay. Now, what is disinvestment? When the when this government, they may sell their shares, their securities to the private sector, and there they convert their on the ownership of the shares and securities to the private sectors, and for that they get the money. That money is used for meeting the expenditure or meeting the budget needs. Expenditure means the revenue and the capital expenditure that is done for the development of the nation. So disinvestment in existing private sector industries, that is why there is need for adopting this private sector, because there was this saving of the government is not saving the amount, they are just spending it on the public. So that is why it is done by the selling the shares to the private company, even they transfer the fully ownership. Next, we have the sale of share of public enterprise. Again, there was a need, there was a measure adopted for this privatization, because there was sale of share of public enterprise. All the shares of public enterprise means the government shares, these are selling to the institutes, to the public, to meet the expenditures, to meet all those need of the government, because the government has to meet the expenditure, meet the budget needs. So these were the measures that are adopted for the privatization. Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now in the LPG, last we have globalization. Globalization means full authority, full freedom is given. Privatization means private sector was developed. And the last is globalization. Now what is globalization? Means integrating the economy with the rest of the world. that is multinational companies gonna be established. So there gonna be free flow of goods and services in all the countries. There is free flow of capital in all these countries. There is free flow of information and technologies in all these countries, and free movement of people in all these countries, and same conflict solving techniques in all these countries. That is called the globalization. Means integrating the economy of the country with the economies of the other countries. So they're gonna be, means the goods are to be exported globally. Okay. So this reform, there was even there was main components of globalization is that we have listed components of globalization. So first we have increase in the equity limit of foreign investment. So when there is globalization is there, so there is increase in the foreign countries gonna invest in the home country. That is called foreign investment. So there is increase in the equity limit of the foreign investment. Next component is the partially convertibility. Means partial convertibility. Like if we talk about the convertibility, means there was convertibility, it was valid for the following transaction, that is for import and export of goods and services, payment of the interest, and remittance to the meet family expenses. See, this partial convertibility, it is required, it is needed because it does not cover the capital transactions. So partial convertibility of rupee, that is allowed. Okay. Next is long-term trade policy. Long-term trade policy means that they're gonna be a long-run relationship with the countries. They're gonna be long-term buying and selling. There is not a short-term period of selling and buying and selling, importing and exporting. There is to be a long-term exporting, that is minimum 5 years are there. So there is to be the trade is to be conducted between these countries. That is to be a long term. That is for a long run. Also, last is the reduction in the tariffs, reduction in the duties that are imposed on these goods. So there is such reduction to be there, just to make the goods globalized, just to make the goods in the all over the nation, rest of the world. So there is reduction in the duties. That is, there are the custom duties are there are tariffs are there. All is to be reduced. So these are the main components of the globalization. Is it clear? Yes, Bacha, is it clear? Okay. So this is all about these economic reforms and its features. Tomorrow we will study the appraisal, and also there was some other economic reforms were there. We will also study that, and the appraisal of LPG. Okay. So up to this, if you have any kind of doubt, you can ask me. Yes, Bacha.
No,
If
ma'am,
you
it's
have any
clear.
kind of doubt, you. Hanji, Bacha.
No, ma'am.
Clear?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
So shall I close?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Bacha. Good day. Take care.
Thank you, ma'am.